Morning students, my name is Jessica Schatz and I'd like to introduce my guest.
Hi, I'm Danielle Marshall and I'm the Team Manager with Project Lead for Signs of Safety and Managing Risk-Taking Behaviour in Adolescents.
I'm really delighted that Danielle's prepared to be interviewed about signs of safety, because what I want to do with this film with Danielle is really focus on practice of signs of safety. We've got some other materials on the website looking at the theory and approaches, but Danielle will be able to take us through the signs of safety approach. So Danielle, if you were to outline what signs of safety is, what the approach involves, what would you say to somebody?
So Signs of Safety was initially created in Western Australia and was a child protection tool initially that was built by Andrew Turnell. He brought it in because of some concerns around child protection where risk wasn't adequately being managed. Since that time, it's evolved hugely. So now Signs of Safety we use as a framework tool across early help and adoption. So it's all our services. And what it really highlights, and something for me that I think the framework is different to other frameworks, is we always start with our strengths. And I think that's something that has been a bit of a culture shift for people, where even in some of the worst, most complex cases, we look at what is happening well in this family, what is happening to keep that child safe before we move on to our worries. So it's a tool that we're using, it's a framework. It relies on the 3 columns, which is our what's working well, what we're worried about, what needs to happen. We build in our danger statements and safety goals, we build a safety plan together, and we scale how safe a child is. So that's the overarching framework, and it's been used in many different ways at the moment in Lincolnshire Children's Services.
Lovely. And could you say a bit more about how in Lincolnshire you use this approach in your work with children and families?
Yeah, definitely. So at the moment, any person that rings through to our customer service centre with a referral to say that they're concerned about a child will be asked those questions based on the Signs of Safety framework. So initially, okay, what is happening in that home that is causing you to be concerned? So what have you seen? It's very evidence-based. So in the past, potentially we'd have heard mummy's using drugs. Then they would be questioned, okay, so how do you know that? Have you seen that? When, where, etc, etc. So that starts at our customer service centre. They take down those worries and concerns. They formulate a danger statement, so a worry statement, which goes through to our area teams, so our FAST teams, and they go out to see the family, and what they do is say, this statement is why we're worried, this is why we've been called. We need to do some investigative work and to find out whether this is a concern or not. That then goes on to be part of our social care assessments. So the framework relies as part of that. So we map out, and by mapping, we talk about those 3 columns. So when we're working with the families, we're looking at, okay, what is working in that family home? Are they keeping the child safe currently? Is there sort of strengths within that family home? Is there other people that are supporting? Is there any harm? And by harm, we're looking at actual harm, so evidence of actual harm to that child, and what's the impact of those behaviours. Our complicating factors, things that are making this case really difficult to deal with, so potentially parents aren't letting us in, mum or dad maybe has a mental health problem, and then our what needs to happen is what we need to do to progress this case forward. So that forms the body of our social care assessments. We also use that in strategy meetings. So where there's a Section 47 investigation, a concern about a child immediately, the team manager will have a phone conversation with police and health, and that will be form the basis. So again, we will map that out based on the framework. We use it within early help. So we replace danger with the word worry, because we recognise that for some early help cases, danger isn't always the issue. So for those lower threshold cases, we look at the worry, and we again use the full framework. And we instead look at a goal that we're working towards rather than potentially a safety goal. Within our looked after teams, we look at placement stability, so signs of stability instead of signs of safety. So what we're looking at is we want the utmost safety for that child in a placement, but how stable that is really key to us. What we don't want is that to break down. So we again use the full framework to scale how effective, how happy a child is at their placement, our worries about the placement and what our goal would be for that young person. We use it in our adoption panels, so when we're matching adopters, we're using the framework again, and what we also use is our direct work tools. So the Signs of Safety direct work tools predominantly are based on something called 3 houses. and it's a house of good things, a house of worries, and a house of dreams. And that is about getting to the child about what's going on in your home that you really like at the moment, what is happening that really sort of is not great, and then what would you love your home to look like. And we can be very creative in how we use that, and we've developed a whole host of tools dependent on the child's level of ability, their age, etc. And we also use it with our children with disabilities teams and our children's homes.
Right. So I hear, Danielle, in summary, you've given me an extremely comprehensive answer, really, in terms of how the Signs of Safety approach is used in Lincolnshire with children and families, from the earliest point of contact with the service in terms of the initial referral being made, through early years help, through Section 47 investigations, through assessments, through case conferences and case conferences reviews for looked after children, and for children even being placed for adoption.
Yeah.
So that really seems to describe every aspect of working with children and families.
Yeah. In Lincolnshire, we chose that we wanted to use the framework right from early help right through to adoption, so our whole continuum. Other local authorities have chosen just to use the tool within child protection, but what we saw was that we have children that's maybe go into early help, potentially go into child protection, they could then become looked after or become adopted. And what we want is that seamless transition and a consistent message for that young person. So then at 18, if they want to look at their files, then they have a consistent message, the same framework was used, one plan, one assessment, and it gives them a real idea of why we were involved and why we were concerned in the first place.
So you've just used the word consistency, and I've noticed as I've been interviewing, you've been very careful with the language that you've been used. So what would you say helps practitioners using Signs of Safety with families to be consistent in what they're doing and what they're saying?
Because the framework is very set and we have very set specific wording, that gives people something to anchor to. So they're very clear when we're looking at harm. We know what we want, what we mean by that in terms of our evidence of harm. And also when we're talking about our complicating factors, things that are just really making this case more difficult to deal with. So there's something that people can really get embedded with, whereas in the past we had a social care assessment, but it would be very much up to the individual as to maybe their interpretation, whereas now we have very clear guidance as to what we expect within each of those sections. We're also trying to be very consistent with our language. So when we talk about scaling, when we talk about harm, when we talk about safety and strengths, it's becoming really key language to everybody and very common. But equally what we want is for parents, regardless of which service area that they're in, to have a real understanding of children's services and what we're talking about. And that's one of the core principles of Signs of Safety.
So you're saying really that as families and parents work with different members of professionals within Lincolnshire, you're wanting them to have consistent messages and responses from the professionals involved,
yeah.
So that it makes it easier to measure the child's welfare.
Definitely. And what we're wanting is that regardless of change of social worker, regardless of change of team, if they've moved area, that actually they are getting a really consistent approach, because some of the research has shown that in the past parents have been confused about why we're involved. They weren't always really clear on why we were worried. They weren't always clear why we were at a conference or an initial child protection conference. So one of the core principles, and something that for me is really key to Signs of Safety working, is being very open and honest and using really clear language that the parents and the children really do understand. So for me, that's where we're starting to get some consistency.
So on that very point then, Danielle, could we just, the last question might be around feedback from parents, because I know that you are involved as a trainer,
yeah,
and as a manager and an observer of Signs of Safety practice. So could you comment on what you've seen and experienced in terms of parents' responses?
Yeah, definitely. So when I've actually spoken to parents, I think the thing that they've really liked the most is that we start with strengths. And I think for them, you know, it's very anxious time for them when a social worker knocks on your door to be part of an assessment, to then maybe go to a conference with a group of professionals all sat. So for families, especially those that have been involved in social care maybe on and off for many years, have said for someone to actually highlight what I do well is fantastic, because I've never had that before. And the research shows if we can really hone on some of that strength work and really work on that, then that can make massive changes.